Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Aquarium of the Pacific's online academy. My name is Alicia. Are you ready to talk about wetland habitats with me this afternoon? Yay! Good. Well, we're going to be talking about a very special place. And maybe you've heard of wetlands. Maybe this is the first time you've ever heard of this very special habitat. So where animals live. So before we get started, though, I wanted to say that there are lots of ways that you can participate along with our class today. So you can text in questions, thoughts, ideas. Maybe you have a fun fact about wetland habitats or a favorite wetland animal that you would like to talk about. Now, I don't have all the answers, but I'll try my best today. So you can text us in at 562-286-1838. And I know that not everybody has an opportunity to text in. That's okay. You can shout out your answers, your ideas. You can write them down. You can draw a picture of the things that we're looking at today. There are lots of ways that you can participate. Now, I'm not alone in our studio. I have my friends Stacy and Allie who are helping me out with the pictures that we're seeing behind us and also all of your text questions and ideas. All right, let's get started. Well, let's take a peek. We're going to be good scientists today, and we're going to make some observations. So we're looking at a couple different examples of what we call a wetland habitat. What do you notice about this place? How is it a little bit different than maybe some of the places you think about when you think about water? So a wetland is really just a place of a piece of land that gets wet. That's it. But it can mean lots and lots of different kinds of habitats. So what is a wetland example? Well, if you think about a river, sometimes rivers overflow and get the places around it wet. And sometimes that can happen during different parts of the year. Sometimes it happens all year round. It can be freshwater. So this, for example, could be a freshwater habitat. And this, you can see it's kind of muddy. Do you notice some of the animals there? Another way that you can classify a wetland are by the types of plants that you can find in this area. So these plants have to be pretty special. A lot of them have ways of dealing with lots or little water. So the water level can change. Again, sometimes it's because there's lots of rain that collects in these areas. Sometimes if it's by the ocean, sometimes it's where a river can connect to the ocean and you have a mixing of salt and fresh water. So let's see, we can have overflowing streams and rivers that can create a wetland. You can have spaces where there's a mix of salt and fresh water that can overflow a little bit as well or create shallow areas, and we call those estuaries. Sometimes there are places that aren't connected to the ocean or rivers directly, but they've had over a long period of time glaciers, a long time ago, big glaciers that have melted and left areas of land that are very wet and muddy, which kind of is, I think, pretty cool. So again, those create spaces where you have really special animals and plants that make up these wetland habitats. And people tend to live pretty close to wetland habitats. So you see here, now not always, but because this is an estuary, this is a place, oh look, there's a boat, we're pretty high up. Because this is a place that is mixing with the ocean, this water here is shallow in some places and deep in others, but it has, again, kind of this what we call brackish, which is a mix of salty and fresh water. So not as salty as the ocean, but definitely not fresh water. Oh, we've had some observations coming in. Wonderful, explorers. So some of those observations were that there is more water than land. Yeah, that's a really great observation, right? So we see in this picture here, there are some islands that have been created by this very large estuary. Again, this is that mixing of salt and fresh water. And I want you to start to think about, you know, why are wetland habitats important? Why would we want to talk about them today? As you think about this, Riley asks, can you drink the water? Oh, that's a really good question. So here, because this habitat has a mix of fresh and salt water. That salt makes the water non-drinkable for us. So, but if we were talking about that overflowing streams and rivers, we call those riparian habitats. And in those riparian habitats, some of the water, especially if it's still connected to the river, is still flowing pretty well, then you can probably drink that. But if you get farther and farther out into land where it's soaked up, it's pretty murky. I'm not sure if you'd want to drink that water without doing a lot of treatments for it. But those are some great questions. So we were thinking about, why would this be important? Well, we said the name habitat earlier, right? This is a place where animals live. And because there's so many unique plants, there's also insects and animals that make their home there. Even the bottom of the estuary here can be pretty unique. A lot of times it's sandy or muddy, so there are special animals that live there. So animals use it for their homes. Because a lot of wetlands are, as we were talking about, connected to rivers and streams, and they flow from the mountains to the ocean, they're part of what we call a watershed. The water is moving from a place that's a little bit higher in elevation down to the oceans. These areas, because it's carrying water through and it gets soaked up in the wetlands, it actually is getting cleaned by those special plants that I was telling you about. So the water is getting soaked up by the ground, it's getting cleaned by those special plants, and then the water that's stored underground is even used by us. So we actually tap into groundwater, as we call it, for drinking water. And having wetlands that are more inland can help us clean our drinking water. If you have wetlands that are closer to the ocean, then it actually cleans that water before it makes its way out into the ocean. So it's cleaner for those animals that live there too. So all of these plants here are unique, meaning that they're special to these wetland habitats, which I think are pretty cool. Some of these plants even have to deal with the salt water. So if they're living close to the ocean, they have special ways to get rid of the extra salt that they're soaking up. Or they have to have ways to be okay being wet, right? You see the trees up here? They probably wouldn't like being inside the water like these plants here. All right. So they also, as we were looking, do you remember that that video that we were cruising on? It had a lot of the different little islands, and there was a lot of different structures, like natural structures. That could be very helpful to protect our coastlines, for example, from storms. So wetlands can actually be a way to protect us from like hurricanes or tropical storms in those places around the United States that often get hit by tropical storms, like on our East Coast. So these are kind of spread out. If you think about big waves coming to land from strong winds, from again like a hurricane or a storm, those large waves would be broken up by these little islands, or even the plant life that we're seeing. So wetlands can help us be protected along our coastline from those storms, which I think are pretty interesting. So we were talking about habitat. We talked about cleaning our water for us, storm protection. It's also a nursery. So there are some animals that use this as a path on their migration, and others use them year round. Others also will swim in. We have lots of bird species that will nest in these areas, or even sharks and rays, and we'll talk about them a little bit later, that will come into the estuaries to have their babies. The water's a little murkier, so it provides, and there's lots of little plants, so it provides a lot of little nooks and crannies for babies to grow up so they're big enough to swim out into the ocean. Pretty cool. So there are a lot of benefits for wetland habitats. Wetlands, though, I will mention that through the whole world, we're actually losing our wetlands. We've lost, they think, just over 80%. Is that a big number? Yeah, it's kind of a big number. 80% of our wetlands around the planet. Here in Southern California, we've lost about 90% of our wetland habitats. And why is that happening? Well, did you notice in some of those pictures and videos that people were living very close to the wetland habitat? Well, because it's close to the ocean, and a long time ago, people didn't quite realize how important our wetlands were to us. They didn't realize that they give us these certain, what we call ecological services. That's a big word. Basically means that it helps humans and animals and the plants that live there. And so they started building really, really close. And sometimes wetlands don't, well, they don't look as, I would say, good as maybe like a forest. And people didn't think they had any use. So they would come and they would pour all kinds of sand and fill in and build on top of the wetland. And that's happened quite a bit here in Southern California. And right now there are a lot of efforts to help us protect these areas and start to get normal water flow through some of these areas, and that's bringing back those species. So pretty cool. This is an example. This is called Colorado Lagoon. This is not too far away from the Aquarium of the Pacific, actually. And this water here, this is kind of far inland, but it eventually connects to the ocean. And so by cleaning this up, making sure it's nice and clean for the animals that live here, and also making sure that the water from the ocean can flow in to these spaces, can bring in nutrients, can bring in little baby animals again that they wanted to come in and have their babies. So having this nice flow of salt water, being able to mix with all the fresh water here is really important. So there's lots of areas that are now being restored so that they can be homes for these animals. So we keep talking about these animals. What animals live in a wetland habitat? Well, let's take a peek. I love talking about birds, so maybe we'll pick some birds here. Oh, this is a good one, Stacy. What animal is this? Does it look like a duck to you? Well, you're right. It is a duck. But it looks like someone's gone in and colored blue over this duck's beak. This is called a ruddy duck. And what we're looking at here is a male ruddy duck. They have these nice blue beaks that happen to change color from a normal black color to like a charcoal gray color to this blue. And they do this to show off to females, to say, I am nice and healthy. It took a lot of energy to change my beak into this color. I'm going to be a great father because I know how to get lots of food. And so birds will often change colors to show that they are going to be great parents because they know how to eat enough good food to make them nice and healthy. And so the ruddy duck here is showing off that nice blue bill, hopefully to find a mate so that they can have babies. And so this is the summertime colors. What's really funny, if you've ever been to the aquarium, we have ruddy ducks here. They swim very gracefully. They actually have legs that are pushed back a little bit farther on their body. And so here's that leg sticking out. But if you've ever seen them come out onto land, they always look a little clumsy. So they're very good at swimming, but they kind of look clumsy on land. In fact, we have a lot of people saying, what happened to your duck? Because their legs are so far back and they kind of, they waddle around. So they're not as graceful, but if you see them in the water, that's truly their home. And so this nice flat beak enables them to eat things like algae and the plants around here. So it's flat, can help them pull off the plants and algae, and even if there's little insects that happen to be inside that plants and algae, they'll eat that too. You can kind of see some of this algae growing. And even if you've been to a park and you've seen a pond, you'll probably see those ducks, right? They dive down and they grab the plants and algae. So that's what it's good for. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at another type of bird. Now I want you to take a moment and make some comparisons. How is this wetland bird the same or different than the duck? Yeah, the colors are different. The legs are different. The bill is different. So what are some clues that tell us that this animal has maybe a different lifestyle, a different way of finding its food? Well, if you look at the legs and the beak, you're probably going to get some hints here. So this bird is what we call a wading bird. it can walk out pretty far into the water without having to swim. And that gives it a good position to grab its prey. Now, it also can wade out into the water, but it can also wade out into the grass or those plants that are around the wetland habitat. So do you remember how we saw some of those tall grasses and those kind of shorter but stubbier plants? Yeah, there are all kinds of insects and reptiles and little mammals like mice that live around the wetland habitat. And that beak is nice and long so that they can reach in and grab their food. So they might grab like a little fence lizard in one meal. They might grab a nice insect. They might even grab some food that's along in the water. So they're really good carnivores. They're eating meat, and they have this multi-purpose beak to help them grab their prey. So don't let their cute little bodies fool you. They're predators. And they can, of course, fly because of those, and they're good at flying because of those nice big wings that they have. So that is the white ibis. I don't know if I told you the name of that bird. And then let's go ahead and compare it to maybe a couple other birds here and see what observations you can make for some of these other birds. Oh, love this one. Okay, you ready? Scientists, what's the same and what's different between the ibis and our black-necked stilt? Anything similar? By the way, as you're making observations, I do want to point out that it looks like with birds, especially in this photo, that their knee is facing the wrong way. But I will tell you a secret. Their knee is actually all the way up here. This part right here is their ankle. Crazy! This is their foot bone, and then these are their toes. So in birds, their ankles are all the way, their knees are all the way up here, and then their ankles are this way. I know that when I learned that, it made a lot more sense for how they were walking, especially when the black-necked stilt goes to rest. It will all of a sudden kind of lay down like this, and you're like, whoa, did those knees just go backwards? It didn't. Those are the ankles. Okay, so you probably have noticed that this bird also has really long legs. In fact, this bird has, second to the flamingo, the largest leg to body ratio, meaning that its legs compared to its body are really, really long. Only the flamingo has legs that are longer in comparison to its body. And then you probably saw this nice long beak. So this nice long beak helps it grab smaller prey, and it's going to be finding food such as little shrimp, little invertebrates. An invertebrate is an animal with no bones, so little worms that are found in that kind of muddy area. It can also grab little insects if they find insects. So here's a great, actually this picture is also showing us some examples of the plants that can tolerate living in and around a wetland habitat. Again, they have to be pretty special to be submerged in water for some of those parts of the year. Now, we were talking a little bit about nurseries, and I'll see if my friend Stacy can bring up some babies that we've had here at the aquarium to show you these black-necked stilt babies. They're so cute. They look like they need to grow into their feet. I love it. So here's the parent. Now, what you're not hearing is the chirping and callback noises that the mom, the dad, and the babies are making. So they're very diligent parents. You can see the mouth opening and closing, right? That beak. So they're constantly calling to their babies. And they're actually very good parents. They're very aggressive. We sometimes have to move them to their own home because they chase all the other birds away, which is good if you think about having to survive and having predators out there in their natural habitat. It's good to have parents that are willing to chase you out if you're a little bit too close to their babies. So here's that black-necked stilt. And then let's see if we have time. I think we have time to maybe meet a couple more birds here. So again, they have different prey that they're eating, and they have different legs to help them either wade into the water a bit. Oh, this is the dowitcher bird. What do you notice about the dowitcher doing? What is it doing? Yeah, it's feeding. So it is able to stick that really long beak down pretty far in order to grab those soft invertebrates, sometimes even little shrimp, but a lot of worms that are digging themselves a little bit deeper into that mud or the sand. So this bird actually lives a little bit more along the estuaries and along the coastlines. You'll find them definitely in wetland habitats or right along the shoreline. There are a lot of birds that, and I'll be honest, it's taken a while to start to tell the difference between them, that have this same look because it's a good body plan. They have a long beak. They have the speckly white and brown appearance, and then they have these long legs. So if you go to the beach, they have a lot of these kinds of birds, but what you'll notice if you start watching them closely is that they're of different sizes. So you'll find some that are tiny, and then they just kind of progressively get bigger, and they can reach different layers of those mud or sand habitats to kind of reach in with their beak. You can kind of see them here. So, oh, this is a great view. You see how they all kind of have the same coloration? It helps them, right? They're camouflaging with their habitat. But if we were to look closer, we'd see that this bird here is a different type than this little bird here. So we have some willets, some dowitchers, and I think there's probably a couple others. And it looks like we may even have a grebe or some sort of duck in the background here. So the grebes, we have locally a pie-billed grebe. Ta-da! I always think that this bird kind of looks like it still needs to grow up. And I think it's because its neck and its head seem so much bigger than its body. It has this nice, powerful neck to help it for swimming. So we were looking at the ducks earlier, and you can kind of see that it doesn't, although it has somewhat of a duck body shape, its legs are even farther back, same like our duck that we were looking at, but its bill is different. Instead of being flat in order to eat plants, this is another carnivore, but it's not having to stab anything. It's trying to catch something quickly. So this is a fish-eating bird, fish and maybe even some small invertebrates. I'm sure it wouldn't pass up a tasty insect that had fallen in. Or even like a little shrimp-like animal, but it is fast enough to chase down small schooling fish. So you can see that nice paddle-like foot in the back, and then it has this sharp beak on it. So this is a pie-billed grebe with a nice powerful neck to help it dive down very quickly into the water. So Alex has asked, what do baby stilts eat? Oh, that's a great question. I think in that video, maybe if we have a chance, we'll go back and take a look. They were eating what we call krill. Krill are small shrimp-like animals, and we can add that to their diet. Oh, okay. Stacy's trying to find the video for us because she's clicking around. She's being a mastermind, DJing all of our pictures and such behind there. All right, so we'll take a look at the babies because they're very cute, but then maybe we can talk a little bit about our water-based friends. So we had talked a little bit about a nursery. So when we think about there's bird species, we mentioned that there's lots of reptiles and lots of insects. There are mammals, so there are small mammals that definitely use our wetland habitats. Locally, coyotes can be found there. We have rabbits, mice. They all live in those areas and are hunted even by the birds. Coyotes will be in there, as I said, raccoons. So you can find animals like that in a wetland habitat. I forgot to mention earlier that one of the ways that a wetland habitat can be built is by beavers. And I was just reading about that. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Beavers make their homes by creating dams, and by doing that, the water overflows into the surrounding areas, creating wetland habitats. I thought that was kind of interesting. So, we talked about glaciers a long time ago melting. We've talked about rivers overflowing and streams, and those estuary habitats where there's a connection between land and ocean. But beavers, I thought that was cool. I think Miss Stacy has found that video for us again. So you can see that the adults, and there are multiple birds, so there are lots of different kinds of birds living in this habitat. So we saw some pellets in there. And then here's that krill. So the bird, we didn't quite see it eat, but it would flip around that krill and take it down. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of those ray and sharks that we might find. So lots of fish too. And some of these fish just start their life out in the estuary and then will swim off. In fact, when we think about commercial fishing, the fish that we like to eat, a lot of those fish start their life in an estuary. And then here is another example of a fish. It's a shark. This is a leopard shark. Have you seen this animal before? Yeah, earlier we were watching our blue cavern habitat, that kelp forest habitat. And when they're older, they can live in areas like kelp forest. But when they're younger, a lot of the females will swim up into an estuary and have their babies. And they have live young. The baby shark is called a pup. And they can have just over 20 pups at a time. Isn't that amazing? That's not true for all sharks. This is just for our leopard shark here. Some sharks lay eggs. Some sharks have live birth. And some sharks even have eggs inside that hatch. So this shark has live birth. And I've actually had an opportunity at the Bolsa Chica wetland, which is a local wetland here in Southern California, close to the Aquarium of the Pacific. I've seen little baby leopard sharks. They're so cute. As adults, they get to be between 4 and 6 feet long. And you can actually snorkel with them off of our coast. They're very friendly. They're actually a little shy. They eat prey off of the bottom. So you'll notice that their mouth isn't up in front. They're not going to be catching fish for the most part. They'll eat fish if they can get it, but they're going to be eating prey that's found underneath them. So they'll hunt things like crabs and snails and clams, anything that is hiding at the bottom of the ocean floor. And so those little babies actually have a great start. They have nice murky waters in those wetland habitats, and then lots of little invertebrates that we were talking about. So those crabs and shrimp, things found at the bottom. As soon as they hatch, they have to be able to survive on their own. Another animal that has a very different body shape, but a kind of a similar pattern is the Batray. That's a local type of ray that we can find here in Southern California. They get quite large. From one tip to the other, they can be 5 feet across. Here's the Batray. Yep, from this tip all the way to the other tip of their fins can be 5 feet across. That's really big. Most of them don't get that large. Most of them are about 2 to 3 feet across, but they will have their babies in a wetland habitat. They too have live birth. We've had a couple of babies here at the aquarium. They're very cute. You can fit them in your hands. They're just miniature versions of the adult. And you can also see that they have mouths all the way underneath their body. And this allows them to find food in these sandy habitats. In the back, we kind of have a shadowy cousin hanging out. This is the guitarfish. Again, another animal that is best suited to kind of hiding at the bottom, finding their food at the bottom. In fact, if the ray wanted to hang out at the bottom of the estuary and hide, all it would have to do is move its side fins and kind of brush that sand or mud on top of it. And all that would be sticking out would be the eyes. Here are the 2 eyes. And then it kind of has a snorkel. Do you see this thing right here? It's like if you were to take your nose and putting it on the top of your head. And this allows the ray to hide underneath and still be able to breathe. Its gills are all the way underneath because it is a fish, still has to breathe underwater. But because the gills are covered, it has these little holes that allows it to breathe even though it's hiding. So you might be cruising along and just see 2 eyes sticking up and it would just be the ray. So as those little bat rays are trying to survive, it's easy for them to kind of wiggle into the sand or the mud, kind of move it on top, and they can hide from predators that way. Okay, so we have reached our 1:30 mark. Now, I had mentioned that I wasn't alone here in our studio. I wanted to share a fun fact that my friend Allie had brought up. She had mentioned that the largest protected wetland is in Bolivia. It's 17 million acres, or you can say the size of North Dakota, an entire state. Can you imagine? Oh, I bet they have some really awesome animals that live in that wetland habitat. So before we go, I wanted you to kind of think about all those different animals and all the things that wetlands do for us. And what are some things that you can do for wetland habitats? Well, because wetlands are often connected to our watershed. Remember, a watershed is that kind of path from the mountains, kind of through rivers and streams all the way to the ocean, and we're connected to a watershed as well. So even in our streets, those storm drains that we have, they go into our local rivers and make their way to the ocean. So by keeping our local waterways clean, by making sure we're not dumping anything in the streets that can go down those storm drains, we're actually keeping our watersheds and our wetland habitats really clean. So these homes need our help. Not only have we been, like we said, building over the top of them, but they have been easily polluted by the things that go down our storm drains. And although they have really great cleaning power, they can only do so much. So letting our wetlands do what they normally do for us, provide all those wonderful services for us, and then also tell your friends about wetland habitats. Maybe, I know things are a little bit different right now, but as we get a chance to explore a little bit more outside, go and visit a wetland habitat. Find one that's local to you. You can even take out your binoculars and see if you can find some of the animals that we were talking about. All right, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our class, and we have one more at 2 o'clock today and throughout the rest of the week. Thank you, everyone.